I've had interesting experiences since my childhood. I can remember a time when I was very little, probably 7 or 8 years old, and I was in a hospital, and I was blind for a time, and I would have this little boy that would come to visit me, and so that was this is the most vivid memory I have of him. And when I was by myself, when my mother wasn't there or the nurses weren't in the room, I was never alone. And one of my aunts bought me a doll that had various clothing, and of course I couldn't see, so this little boy would dress the doll. And when I recovered and it was time to go home, I became very distraught because I couldn't say goodbye to this little boy, and nobody in the hospital seemed to know what I was talking about. So at 7 or 8 years old, I was pretty upset, and frankly, people thought it was anesthesia, or I was, having some problems, and I'd get over it. And it stuck with me my whole life, and it set me on a path. When I got into my teens and 20s, I began reading everything I could read. I checked more books out of the library by Edgar Cayce and everything you could imagine that was available to me, in the 50s and 60s, and set apart to understand what had happened to me. And so my whole life has been this underlying calling. As I got older, I became very interested in the church. I grew up a Roman Catholic, and so I loved. There was something about the liturgy, the mystical part of it, that attracted me. And the single most important image for me was the pictures of the Sacred Heart, that heart being outside of the body in the center of the beingness, both for the Christ, the pictures of Jesus, and for the pictures of Mary. And those images stayed with me. I was always came back to that. And as I got older, I became involved in the church, and I did music, and I trained lectors and spoke, and of course I was not permitted to have any other role because I was female, and that just didn't, I was not happy about that. And being quite an outspoken person, I made that pretty well known to the priest friends and nuns with whom I was in contact, and it was the nuns who really encouraged me to stand up for what I believed in, as they did. And so I went about my life, and my mother became terminally ill, and in the 90s, in the early 90s, and I was teaching at the time at university. I was a speech and public speaking instructor, and left for a while to be with her. She was sent to a kind of a Mayo Clinic type hospital in Temple, Texas, called Scott White, and I stayed there in a Ronald McDonald house for 30 days to be with her. And so I became very, very close with the different ministers and the different chaplains and clergy at that hospital. Spent a lot of time in the chapel because my mother was afraid to die, and I could not handle that part of it. And I would be the one who would be sitting with her saying, "Mom, it's okay, the Christ light is all around you," and it really disturbed me. Not that I was going to lose my mother, because I knew I wasn't losing my mother. I might not be seeing her, but I knew that I wasn't losing her. And so I was disturbed because my mother was really afraid to cross over. And this sent me to countless hours in 30 days inside a chapel inside of Scott White Hospital, and became very, very close with not only the doctors on her team. She had a very, very rare lung disorder, and they even gave me permission to sit in their research library and look up and understand what was happening to my mother. And so at one point, I was in the chapel one day. My mother had coded again, and I was sitting there all by myself, and I was crying, and I thought, how can I help my mother not be afraid? What can I do? And the door opened behind me, and the man came in the chapel and sat down in the row in front of me. And, I was trying to, I was doing the ugly cry, so I was trying to, tissue up and, bring myself back to a place where I wasn't making a complete fool of myself. And I sat back in the pew, and pretty soon this man got up and sat down next to me, and I noticed he had a collar on, a minister's collar. And he turned to me and he said, are you okay? And I said, yes. He said, may I ask why you're here? So I told him about my mother and her fear to die. And he said, could I pray with you? And I said, oh, absolutely. So this minister turned and he said, may I hold your hands? And I said, of course. And he began to pray in a very, Lord, and he was praying out loud. And I was Catholic, so I was very quiet about my prayer. But I was repeating what he was saying, but I wasn't doing it out loud. And I'll never forget this moment as long as I live. And after a few minutes, he had finished, and I asked him why he was here. And he said he was here for a little girl. And I said, oh. And, well, he wished me well. And he said it was going to be all right. And he got up. And the minute he got up, I knew who he was. And at that point, the door just closed behind me. And in nanoseconds, I was up off the pew and out the door looking for this minister. And I looked up and down the hallways. I didn't see him. It was as though he had vanished. And I started running through the hospital crying. People were looking at me like I'd lost my mind or escaped from the psycho ward. And then I remembered he said he was looking for a little girl. So I went up to the pediatric ward looking for him. Couldn't find him. Asked the nurses. Nobody knew who I was talking about. So I went back to the chaplain's office, and he was a Presbyterian minister, and he saw that I was crying. He goes, Linda, is your mom okay? What's going on? I said, no, who is this black preacher with, he had a collar on, he was dressed in a black suit, black preacher, real sweet. He just prayed with me in the chapel. And he goes, I don't remember a black chaplain here. And I said, and I was really upset, and I went running back to the chapel, and I just I was so upset with myself for not recognizing who this guy was. And it was the same person that used to come to my room when I was a little girl, and who changed the clothes on my doll. I just knew it was because he was a little black boy, and I was the only one who could see him. And I knew that was the same guardian angel. I was a little girl he was coming to see. And needless to say, I know that there's a presence in this world that I've had 2 near-death experiences that have also confirmed all of that for me. And so I have been boldly on this path, very confident within myself, because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God created all of us the same. We may look male and female, and we may look black or green or yellow or red, but we're one. And so I left the Roman Catholic Church after that experience in that chapel and started to seek ministry. And first found the Alliance of Divine Love, where I was first ordained, a non-denominational sort of interfaith group that's been around for about 42 years, and on whose council I now sit to run that organization. I've been involved with them since 1997. And then about 9 years ago, I read a book called Love Without End by Glenda Green, and was so touched by the Christ message that I began to seek that group out and spent many a day in Sedona, Arizona, where I met Bishop Lee Allen Petersen and the Freeborgs and many of the others in this group. And after a few years, I became ordained and as a priest, and then we began to have a mystical order. The church that we were in with them took a different direction, and we wanted to take it to another level, into a more contemporary mystic level, and therefore, hence the beginning of the Order of the Friends of Jeshua, with whom I have been with ever since, and sort of do the administrative work for them happily. And so here I am, just blessed beyond measure to be a part of these groups that guide me and have brought me to this place in my life. So, well, Gary, I'm just so grateful. Lord, he prayed like a fundamentalist preacher. He had my hands, and the calm that I felt in my hands was beyond belief. And I just sat there, and I was repeating every word to myself, because I was Catholic, and I didn't say things out loud, except when I was told to.
But it was very real, and it was incredibly
It was
magical.
incredible.
The fact
He
that
manifested like you. I touched him, I held his hands. The little black boy in my hospital room, I saw him, I touched him, he would dress my doll. And I would tell my mother, this little boy would dress my doll today, and he had on this dress or that dress, because I had bandages on my face. So how would I know? He told me what dress it had, and I remembered. And then I saw him. When they took the bandages off, they would have to bathe my eyes because they were crusty.
Mhm.
I had that thing where the muscles collapsed, and I had no eyeballs in my head. It was just amazing. And anyway, I saw him. He had the chubby, rosy cheeks, and he was just real sweet, and I just loved him, and he loved me.
Did you tell your mom?
Oh, yeah.
You told your mom?
Yeah, and every time my mother took me to the clinic for checkups, I would drag her all over that clinic looking for that little boy. I would be on the bus and the train, I'd be looking for him for years. I never forgot him, ever. Well, he's been with me, following me all around my life, apparently, because he wound up being in my mother's hospital. Came to see me and console me. And I was a different person after that experience.
And it makes me think about honoring children in a way where, we know that they have these experiences and they don't feel safe to speak of them. But when you see that, when you honor them, and it's not about language, but I had imaginary monkey friends that when I was a little girl and talked to them in my bedroom, and very real to me, but, it wasn't really allowed. You weren't really, yeah. So it's beautiful that your mom was so supportive and that you could share.
I remember teaching in a college one day. I was at Broward Community College teaching a class in Coconut Creek, Florida. And one day this woman stayed after class. Everybody was leaving, and this older woman that was taking my class sort of stayed. And she got up and closed the door. And I thought to myself, oh, goodness, what is she going to say to me? And I said, did you want to speak with me? And she said, yeah, but I'm a little concerned about what I have to tell you. And I said, well, don't be concerned. What is it you have to tell me? And she was real shy, and she was very quiet in class, and it was only a few weeks of class. And she said, well, they keep telling me to tell you this, and I just can't keep it to myself anymore. I said, well, what do you see? Do you see something around me? Or she said, oh, you know about that? I said, well, sort of. And she said, yeah. She said, you have no idea the stuff, the light that goes around you as soon as you start to speak. And I knew what she meant, because there have been so many times in my life where I have said things, particularly in the college classroom, where I knew it didn't come out of my intellect. I just knew it didn't. Because I would be saying, oh, holy moly, where did that come from, to myself, because I knew it didn't come out of my brain. Mm-hmm. And I knew it came through me. And if that's happened to me, enormous amount of times. And she saw it. She saw it. She saw the light around me. I've never been able to see quite what this woman told me, and it turned out I got to know her very well, and she was a very devout Catholic. She grew up a Catholic. She said, Linda Marie, I used to talk to my angels on the phone. My mother thought I was playing with my toy telephone, only I was really hearing voices. But I was so afraid to say anything to anyone. She said, so this has just been part of my life. And she said, sometimes I meet people, and she said, you're just one of those rare people that I had to tell you. They said you had to know. And then, I thanked her. I thanked her, and she said, you are divinely protected, and when you open your heart, the words come out of your mouth. And I said, well, I know they're not from my brain, because some of the things I say just amaze me.